Hello from the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba. This is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Now we begin with the news. The general debate of the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly continues on Thursday, with world leaders speaking out in support of peace and the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. On the third day of the general debate of the United Nations General Assembly, hosted interventions focused on the search for equality in access to health, science and technology applied to development as ways for food security, the redesign of the international financial architecture, as well as the rejections of policies of economic sanctions to countries such as Venezuela, Cuba and Zimbabwe. On the other hand, it is worth mentioning that on Wednesday, several African leaders took the floor and offered their overview on the global situation from their continental perspective. And the President of the Central African Republic, Faustin Archange Touadéra, at the UN General Assembly referred to the sanctions policies affecting his nation, as well as coercive measures against natural resources.
I remind you and I rue the fact that arms embargoes and diamond embargoes that have been renewed for the last 10 years happen in parallel with the suspension of budgetary and economic support, and both of these factors are real obstacle for my country's achievement of the realization of Agenda 2030. Here we repudiate this denial of our right to self-determination and permanent sovereignty over our wealth and natural resources, rights guaranteed by the relevant legal instruments of the United Nations. Please do away with these trumped-up mechanisms which thinly veil a desire to allow insecurity to reign and to continue a stranglehold over our natural resources for the benefit of foreign powers. These mechanisms ultimately legitimize armed groups and give them the status of being a subject of international law.
The President of Malawi, Lazarus Mokhari Chakwera, during his speech at the 78th edition of the United Nations General Assembly, highlighted the country's economic and social path taken by the nation.
As a nation, we took the SDGs and aligned our national aspirations to reflect them. So even though we have our sights set on the Malawi 2063 vision, we also created an implementation plan for the first 10 years that coincides with the decade of action on SDGs in the context of Agenda 2030. And our focus has already started yielding fruit, because in the past few years we have stayed on track with our quest to end hunger in line with SDG 2, to safeguard the good health and well-being of our citizens in line with SDG 3, to improve quality of education in line with SDG 4, to leverage Malawi's abundant water resources for better sanitation in line with SDG 6.
The President of Malawi also called out the heads of state of the UN Security Council member nations for not being present at the general debate and requested Africa should have a seat at the Council to ensure trust within nations.
It is no accident that at this 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly focused on rebuilding trust and solidarity. Only one head of state from the permanent members of the UN Security Council showed up. That is not how you build trust. That is not how you show solidarity. That is not accountability. That is not leadership. As such, I believe President Biden said it so well here. And Malawi joins the United States in insisting that Africa must have a permanent seat on the UN Security Council with veto power, because without that level of inclusivity, rebuilding trust and reigniting global solidarity will be a challenge.
In the framework of the UN General Assembly, Emerson Dambuzo Mnangagwa, the president of Zimbabwe, denounced the unilateral coercive measures imposed by Western powers and called for the lifting of sanctions against his nation and Cuba.
Zimbabwe has been under the illegal unilateral economic sanctions for 23 years, imposed by some Western countries. These sanctions were designed to subjugate the sovereign will of the Zimbabwean people. We therefore demand that the unjustified unilateral sanctions be unconditionally lifted, including those imposed on countries like Cuba. We remain grateful for the support and solidarity of progressive countries in the Committee of Nations. In spite of these debilitating sanctions, the people of Zimbabwe have become masters of their destiny. This is anchored on a philosophy that, as a people, we have the duty and responsibility of developing our country using our own domestic resources.
The President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Emerson Dambuzo Mnangagwa, also emphasized the importance of science, technology, and innovation for developing countries.
Science, technology, and innovation are essential ingredients to leapfrog the modernization and industrialization of developing countries. To this end, Zimbabwe continues to reap the benefits of a comprehensive and transformative heritage-based higher education curriculum. The innovation hubs and industrial parks established within institutions of higher education have refocused young people in our tertiary institutions towards developing and producing goods and services. Allow me to reaffirm that Zimbabwe is actually open for business.
For his part, the president of South Sudan, Salva Kiir Mayardit, stressed his country's claim of the UN to lift the arms embargo on the African nation.
As we move in this direction, we call upon the United Nations to lift the arms embargo imposed on us to aid peace implementation and to secure the elections. The arms embargo has impeded the implementation of security arrangements because effective deployment of the unified forces, which we have graduated, cannot happen without arms.
On Wednesday, the presidents of Brazil and Ukraine, Lula da Silva and Volodymyr Zelensky, held their first meeting at the United Nations General Assembly. After a disagreement generated by the Brazilian president's proposal for a peace dialogue with the two parties in conflict, rejected with strong reproaches by the Ukrainian president, the meeting finally took place. President da Silva ratified the importance of building paths for peace, recognizing the importance of the meeting, while the Ukrainian president assured that he had instructed his diplomatic teams to maintain bilateral relations and efforts for peace. The meeting of the presidents provided an opportunity for the two governments to break the ice. And on Wednesday, the president of Bolivia, Luis Arce Catacora, signed an agreement at the United Nations for the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity in areas beyond the national jurisdiction. The United Nations General Assembly adopted an agreement that establishes monitoring standards for the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. These areas include the open ocean and maritime regions beyond national borders, such as international waters not under the sovereignty of any country in particular. The goal of the agreement, according to the Foreign Ministry, is to address environmental challenges and preserve marine biodiversity on a planetary scale. And now we move on to other topics. The water coverage of nations with territories in the Amazon, the largest tropical rainforest on the planet, is on the verge of changing drastically. A report drafted by Map Biomas indicates that Brazil, Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, Guyana, Peru, Suriname, and Venezuela, countries that are part of the Amazon, have lost the equivalent of 1 million hectares in water surface in the last decade. The study warns of the reduction of water surface and its contribution to the proliferation of forest fires and the increase in greenhouse gas emissions. The countries that recorded the greatest reduction in water surface area are Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. Let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at TeleSUR English, where you will find the news in different formats, news updates, and more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back. The business forum between Brazil and Cuba was held at the Federation of the Industries of the Brazilian city of Sao Paulo. The possibilities of trade between the two countries were put on the table. The event facilitated the meeting of business persons from both countries and signified the resumption of commercial relations between the two nations. During the first day, attendees discussed the achievements of foreign companies operating in Cuba, the significance of minerals like Cuban zeolite and Brazil's trade, and the potential for imports and exports through the Moriel port, which generates 16,811 direct and indirect employment opportunities. The development of this forum confirmed both nations' commitment to building and strengthening friendly relations.
In general, I believe that this is a first approximation after the pandemic period of the crisis and that it will have continuity. There is an appreciation that Brazil will have an important presence on the international fair to be held in Havana in November, which of course will give continuity to what we have done here and will be organized by the Brazilian Sport Promotion Agency. And I believe it will be an important moment to continue the work we have done here.
On Wednesday in Argentina, the first debate of vice presidential candidates was held almost a month before the first round of the presidential elections. In the debate participated the candidates Agustín Rossi of Union for the Homeland, Luis Petri of Together for Change, Victoria Villarruel of Liberty Advances, Florencio Randazzo of We Make Our Country, and Nicolás del Caño of Left United Front. The debate was divided in topics related to economy, inflation and labor, role of the state and social conflict, insecurity, policy, defense, and justice. In the appearance of Agustín Rossi, Sergio Massa's running mate highlighted that in an eventual government they will focus on the rights of workers, women, and human rights, and said that his party will continue with the policy of promoting more universities for young people and strengthening entrepreneurs. And now we continue broadcasting and hearing the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly.
Ladies and gentlemen, like most preceding speakers, I would also like to express my fraternal compassion and solidarity with the peoples of Morocco and Libya, who have been so hard hit recently by natural disasters with unthinkable consequences. A few weeks ago, I received the report of a mission that I had sent to Libya as part of the African Union mission of peace and reconciliation, which I have headed for almost 6 years. The report from this mission is a testament to the courage and resilience of the Libyan people, who are weary of living divided. A people that is fighting to banish the demons of the country's partition, to return to the path of truth, reconciliation, and peace. A people determined to walk the path of recovery and to regain prosperity. This is a people, a brave and courageous people that have given so much to Africa. It is to them that I express my sincere condolences. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the theme of our general debate clearly reflects our common will to change the world in a qualitative manner. Thus was the noble philosophy and the aim of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the UN 2030 Agenda to ensure peace, security, and prosperity for all the peoples of the world. Whether we're striving to eliminate poverty and hunger in the world, thanks to a more just and equitable global economy, and thanks to a more efficient and sustainable agriculture, or whether we're working to guarantee health for as many as possible and quality education for the most underprivileged. These are all absolute priorities, as are, inter alia, providing water and electricity to as many people as possible, building road, rail, port, airport, and energy infrastructure to link territories, countries, regions, and subregions. The conservation of biodiverse ecosystems, especially through responsible management of these tropical forests that are some of the most precious gifts that Providence has bestowed upon us. Fighting to change mindsets throughout the world while respecting the diversity of cultural expression and while promoting mutual tolerance. Inculcating our societies with the idea of gender equality and gender parity, and empowerment of women and girls. With regards to that last point, I'd like to underscore the weighty role played by women in my country over the last 15 years. Today, women contribute immensely to promoting their rights and freedoms, to eliminating poverty and expanding inclusive education through training and study of all kinds. To sum up, all of these priorities that I have just listed call upon all of us to have a heightened sense of duty and responsibility, as well as openness toward the virtues of dialogue, a strong spirit of solidarity, patience, and resilience. The well-being of the nations of the world, I believe, hinge largely upon this change and this choice. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, today, the climate is the most pressing of all emergencies. This emergency strikes at the heart of life in all of its diversity. It jeopardizes our existence in all of its complexity. The inexorable rise of sea levels that jeopardizes island countries, rampant desertification that nothing seems to be able to stop, suffocating heat waves that take the lives of so many elderly people, frequent flooding, and sudden mudslides that cause the damage that we've seen recently. These are all dangerous and devastating phenomena that have shocked even the skeptics among us. And that is why, shouldering my responsibility as president of the Climate Commission of the Congo Basin, I launched during the COP27 in Egypt an initiative called the Global Reforestation Decade for greater biodiversity and for denser vegetation cover for the benefit of humanity. In the same spirit, my country, the Republic of Congo, has committed to hosting in October a summit of 3 basins of biodiversity ecosystems and tropical forests, namely the Congo and the Amazon, Borneo Mekong, as well as Southeast Asia, as a collective and concerted response of these 3 green lungs of our planet to climate insecurity, which threatens all of us. Since time immemorial, as we all know, forests have made life possible for millions and millions of people. With a deforestation rate that is one of the lowest in the world, just 0.06%, my country is fully playing its part in protecting the environment for the survival of humanity. Today, we warmly welcome the inscription of the Odzala Kokua Natural Reserve on the World Heritage List, in the World Heritage List. This took place at the 45th session of the UNESCO World Heritage Committee, which was recently held in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. This is clearly an act of recognition, an act that justly rewards the efforts of my country to preserve this natural treasure of almost 1.2 million hectares, so rich in animal and plant biodiversity in the heart of the Congo Basin. The sacrifices made by riparian communities who have voluntarily given up certain activities that could harm the environment, and the willingness of states to abandon development projects to protect biodiverse ecosystems. These should also be compensated financially by the international community, a compensation that is in no way charity. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, in Africa, with regard to agricultural development, we know that we must protect arable land from the harmful effects of climate change. Otherwise, production estimates would vary widely, and planning would become impossible. Our responsibility as leaders is clear as day. With a population of nearly 2 billion in 2050, Africa must now make a qualitative leap to ensure that in the future it has sufficient and high-quality food and can thus banish forever the specter of famine and population flight. Africa is in dire need of modern agriculture, supported by modern irrigation and mechanization systems. Agriculture that would allow it to greatly reduce its food imports, which are still too high. That is why I'm calling for effective technical and financial partnerships to make great strides in this sector. Africa has no need for partnerships based on official development aid that is politically oriented and tantamount to organized charity. Trickle-in subsidies filtered by the selfish interests of donors will certainly not allow for a real and effective rise of our continent. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the current session of the General Assembly is taking place at a time when wars and other armed conflicts are raging throughout the world. Here, I would like to once again underscore that no progress is possible on any continent or any country without peace. The hope of attaining the SDGs laid out by the UN would be merely an illusion if we do not ourselves create the most important of all conditions needed for the realization, that is to say, peace. For its part, and whenever possible, the Republic of Congo has always striven toward the peaceful resolution of conflicts in Africa and throughout the world. That is why my country has decided to take active part in the African Initiative for Peace Mediation between Russia and Ukraine. Due to the risk of generalized war that these events are creating for the world, it is not only the two belligerents in this conflict, but also foreign powers that could nudge the course of events toward peace. All of these actors must temper their emotions, stop fanning the flames, and commit immediately to engaging in peace negotiations that would be just, sincere, and equitable. The world desperately needs these negotiations to prevent the confrontation that's already underway, already so devastating, from further spiraling and pushing humanity into what could be an irreversible cataclysm. That is to say, total war beyond the control of the great powers themselves. I remain convinced that the wise recommendations put forward by Africa to restore peace between Ukraine and Russia will ultimately be heeded. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, as President of the High-Level Committee of the African Union on Libya, I would be remiss not to mention before this august assembly the dire situation that this country has been living in since 2011. A situation in which I am fully invested on behalf of the African Union. Efforts toward peace made in this difficult situation continued recently in July of this year as part of a reconciliation meeting that took place in Brazzaville, in my country. This meeting allowed various actors from the entire Libyan political and social spectrum to sit at the same table. We spared no effort to encourage the parties involved to overcome their differences and to reconcile their views of the challenges that a future Libya would face. The Inter-Libyan Reconciliation Conference, which I preside, aims at mediation, but it will not be effective unless it is inclusive, constructive, and consensus-based. It must allow our Libyan brothers and sisters to rediscover the virtues of dialogue and to end their standoff, to learn to forgive each other, and to give precedence to justice, the foundation of the law-based state, whose history they are called on to write. Once again, I call for the support of the international community, beginning with the countries of the sub-region and the organizations that they belong to, as well as, of course, the countries of the Quartet, to provide tangible support for our efforts to create a strong and credible prospect of resolving once and for all this crisis, which has gone on far too long. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, in light of the unilateralism that is dangerously eroding the foundations of the great edifice that so many generations have helped to build since 1945, the Republic of Congo, through myself, reaffirms its commitment to multilateralism, the key to justice in international relations, and the key to balance, equity, peace, and cooperation for shared development. Multilateralism, as we all know, can only flourish in a just and equitable global system, a system that reflects not the phantoms of the past, but the changing reality of our time. Whence the urgent need to reform its flagship instrument, that is, the Security Council of the UN, in order to guarantee fairer representation of all continents and all peoples of the world. Here, Africa has a common position, a compromise and consensus-based position signed in Eswatini, which my country has staunchly defended for more than a decade. Here and now, I reiterate the African demand, legitimate in every way, to see two of its states accorded permanent membership of the Security Council of the UN with veto rights. This would merely be justice in the face of history. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Congo for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency William Sumo Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya and Commander-in-Chief of the Defense Forces. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency William Sumo Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya and Commander-in-Chief of the Defense Forces, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Thank you very much. The world over today, hundreds of millions of people are besieged by anxiety about their present and future security, dignity, and prospects of well-being. Many are victims and witnesses of present assaults of many, and many more are afraid of future violations of their most fundamental expectations. In his opening address, our Secretary General provided a graphic snapshot of the condition of the world and humanity, a situation that calls into question the state of multilateralism in terms of its founding aspirations as well as its present agenda. The poverty, fear, suffering, and humanitarian distress haunting the victims of conflict, drought, famine, flooding, wildfires, cyclones, deadly disease outbreaks, and other disasters are the outcomes of sustained violation of the most essential principles and the systemic neglect of humanity's dearest values, which lie at the very foundation of the UN Charter. The failure of peace and security systems, inadequate development, and limited climate action amidst technological advancement and enormous wealth has left us in a state of paralysis, enduring one of the darkest periods of human existence. We may all agree, without any fear of contradiction, that the world is headed in a most undesirable direction. It is moments like this that the affirmative spirit of multilateralism, international collective action, and global solidarity is most needed and should be attained. This is not the occasion for any member of the United Nations to escape when they should be rising to the challenge of the moment. Resorting to pursuit of narrow, insular, antisocial agendas within exclusive clubs constituted to maintain the status quo that undermines and cannibalizes the United Nations systems at the expense of progress in humanity's collective journey to the future of our aspirations is totally unacceptable. The existence of this inimical clique of geopolitical formations defies the fundamental values and principles of the UN system, and its operations have led to alienation, mistrust, insecurity, and exclusion of and among peoples, nations, regions, and continents. Moments like now place the nature and purpose of multilateralism under sharp scrutiny for history's honest examination and judgment. If any confirmation was ever needed that the United Nations Security Council is dysfunctional, undemocratic, non-inclusive, unrepresentative, and therefore incapable of delivering meaningful progress in our world as presently constituted, the rampant impunity of its actors on global scene settles that matter. The environment of pervasive mistrust between the global north versus the global south, developed versus developing, rich versus poor, polluters versus victims, and net emitters versus net victims, which complicate and frustrates multilateralism, is the inevitable result of promises not kept, commitments not actualized, resolutions not honored, and principles not observed. Multilateralism has been failed by abuse of trust, negligence, and impunity. A year ago, I stood in this assembly hall to call upon the global community to transform the UN system in order to achieve a consensus-driven, rules-based multilateral system which works for the people of the world in their diversity. It is time for multilateralism to reflect the voice of the farmers, represent the hopes of villagers, champion the aspirations of pastoralists, defend the rights of fisherfolk, express the dreams of traders, respect the wishes of workers, and indeed protect the welfare of all peoples of the world. In the face of the most urgent crisis of our time, it is now clear that the international community has fallen seriously behind in meeting its targets in both climate action and the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as their underlying enabler, peace and security. we as Africa have come to the world not to ask for arms, charity, or handouts, but to work with the rest of the global community to give every human being in this world a decent chance of security and prosperity by taking necessary actions, mobilizing adequate resources for investment, confronting security challenges, and resolving conflict as we all make our contribution to global prosperity. Kenya is proud of the contribution it continues to make in its tireless endeavor to support peacemaking, conflict prevention, peacekeeping, peace building, and other interventions undertaken across different regions. All across Africa, there is progress in efforts to resolve conflict and restore peace and stability, while at the same time, we are witnessing setbacks to democratic consolidation in the form of unconstitutional changes to governments. Kenya remains committed, determined, and indefatigable in its contribution to unity, peace, security, stability, and prosperity. Often, we have made encouraging progress. For example, on 5th December 2022, the Juba Peace Agreement ushering in a 2-year transition was signed by the parties to the conflict in Sudan. A day after, the Inter-Congolese Dialogue on EAC-led process and concluded its 3rd session in Nairobi. The following day, the government of Somalia and Somaliland agreed to resume reconciliation. We are also proud of the progress made in stabilizing Eastern DRC as a result of the EAC regional force setting the DRC on the path to sustainable peace and stability. In Ethiopia, the guns have gone silent following the Pretoria and Nairobi agreements, while in South Sudan, the parties have committed to explore ways to resume and conclude the stalled peace process and to hold elections. Our proactive commitment to peace, which is not limited to our continent, inspired us to dispatch the African Peace Delegation consisting of 6 African heads of state to Moscow and Kiev with a 10-point peace plan, beginning with efforts to initiate a mediation process to resolve the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Although the delegation encountered significant challenges in their mission, we remain very proud that they showed up. The hunger for peace and security in Africa is evident, and this bodes well for the prospects of attaining the Africa Union's Agenda 2063 and global peace. Kenya stands in solidarity with all humanity without regard to region, border, or hemisphere. This is why and how we see the people of the Republic of Haiti, who are suffering immensely from the bitter legacy of slavery, colonialism, sabotage, and neglect. As a nation which was forced to wage a painful struggle for our own independence and sovereignty, Kenya empathizes very deeply with the humiliation of our proud people in Haiti and the price they have had to pay for their hunger for liberty and the sorrow they have endured for their thirst for freedom. Haiti is the ultimate test of international solidarity and collective action. The international community has failed this test so far and thus let down a people very, very badly. Haiti deserves better from the world. The cry of our brothers and sisters who were the first people to win their struggle for freedom from colonial tyranny has reached our ears and touched our hearts. Doing nothing in the face of the historic isolation, neglect, and betrayal of the people of Haiti is out of question. Inaction is no longer an option. As we mobilize to show up for Ukraine and countries that have experienced the devastating impact of climate shocks, including Libya, Morocco, and Hawaii, We must not leave Haiti behind. We must commit to show up in the spirit of solidarity to support our people regain their political and socio-economic footing by reinforcing the underlying enabler that is security. Kenya is ready to play its part in full and join with a coalition of other nations of goodwill, and there are many, as a great friend and true sibling of Haiti. We urge the United Nations to urgently deliver an appropriate framework to facilitate the deployment of multinational security support as part of a holistic response to Haiti's challenges. We call on the Security Council to contribute positively by approving a resolution under Chapter 7 that tailors the security support mission to the specific needs of Haiti and its people. This should be part of a comprehensive strategy that includes delivering humanitarian aid, supporting livelihoods, instituting reforms, and fostering a political process guided and owned by Haitians, all in the aim of enabling free and fair elections within a reasonable time frame. We are encouraged by many countries which have already stepped forward to take part in this solidarity. We must recognize that stability, peace, and security form the foundation on which the pursuit and realization of sustainable development and climate action stands. This realization must enable us to formulate strategies which treat these initiatives as interconnected, mutually reinforcing, and complementary dimensions of a single agenda. The tragic spectacle of young people from Africa boarding rickety contraptions to gamble their lives away on dangerous voyages in pursuit of opportunities abroad, either as conflict, climate, or economic refugees, is a statement of the failure of the global economic system. At the recently concluded Africa Climate Summit in Nairobi, we undertook to begin the journey to course correct and execute a paradigm shift in our pursuit for development and climate action. First, we recognize that both climate action and sustainable development goals must be pursued simultaneously with greater resolve, urgency, and ambition. No meaningful development can take place in countries that are also struggling with climate shocks, and yet, at the same time, the frequency of climate emergencies impedes any meaningful development. As a defining outcome of the Africa Climate Summit, we committed Africa to consider the dual problems through an opportunity lens and deliver effective solutions by pursuing a fresh trajectory. Development is a basic necessity for every society. It must happen one way or another. There should be no doubt about that. Annually, 30 million young people in our continent need jobs, and many more need food. Half of our continent is in the dark, without access to electricity in 2023, while hundreds of millions can only cook using biomass because they have no electricity. This is why the commitment of African nations in the Nairobi Declaration is both radical and transformative. Development, in our opinion, is a fundamental imperative, and green growth is the only sustainable way to achieve it. From our standpoint, there is no need to be trapped in a false choice. Sustainable development is robust climate action, and climate action is development. Africa's potential is defined by abundant and diverse resources, ranging from a youthful, highly skilled, and motivated young population, immense renewable energy potential, and mineral resources, including critical minerals, and extensive natural capital endowment, including 60% of the world's unutilized arable land. Capital and technology can find no better returns anywhere than the tremendous investment opportunity in Africa's potential. Such investment would drive green growth, creating jobs and wealth, while decarbonizing global production and consumption. Further, the investments would also connect over 600 people to clean electricity, provide clean cooking to about 1 billion people, finance green manufacturing, including e-mobility, transform African agriculture and food systems, including the manufacture of green fertilizer, process vast tonnage of steel, aluminum, and lithium required by new green industries, and enable our young people find the livelihoods they desire at home, and reverse the tide of migration in the opposite direction. To unlock financing at scale and create incentives for investment at scale in green opportunities, the Nairobi Declaration makes the reform of the international financial system a priority. No meaningful climate action or development can take place in conditions of financial distress. According to IMF data, as of last month, 10 low-income countries were already in debt distress, and 52 are at high or moderate risk of falling into debt distress. The 3.3 billion people in these countries are trapped in a vicious circle of emergency responses, reconstruction, and recovery from more frequent climate shocks, which diverts resources away from both development and climate action, and sucking vulnerable countries into a downward spiral of debt and environmental stress. The global community must therefore develop a debt restructuring initiative that does not wait for nations to plunge over the cliff into debt distress before providing relief. Rather, the new sovereign debt architecture should extend the tenure of sovereign debt and provide a 10-year grace period for countries that are in debt distress. The second financing intervention relates to concessional financing. It is time to work with the international financial institutions to provide more concessional loans, approximately to the tune, in our estimation, of about $500 billion, and to provide increased liquidity support through special drawing rights with a minimum target of what was obtained during the COVID pandemic of $650 billion. Access should be based on specific needs, not entitlement, and this necessitates changes to the allocation mechanism, different from what we saw during SDRs for COVID. The third critical reform is that of the financial market reorganization. The entire system of risk assessment and the opaque methodologies employed by credit rating agencies and risk analysis needs to be overhauled at the minimum. We must all recall the miscalculation of subprime mortgage risks by these agencies 2 decades ago, which precipitated a financial crisis whose effects reverberate to date, and ask the following question: on what basis should we believe that their methodologies are better at assessing risk in faraway frontier markets like ours, that are far much more complicated to measure objectively, than in assessing the value of financial assets in the markets where they actually operate, and which they got so disastrously wrong? If they got it wrong then, I bet you they have it wrong now. In any case, any objective rating must also take into account principles of responsible sovereign lending and accounting, specifically emphasizing the need for international accounting systems that supports the proper valuation of mineral wealth, natural capital, and ecosystem services in the computation of national GDPs. Until that is done, very wealthy countries will be categorized as poor. The fourth limb of the interventions arising out of the Nairobi Declaration is the establishment of a global public climate financing mechanism funded through a global carbon tax on trade in fossil fuels, as well as an emissions levy on aviation and maritime transport, including the option of a global financial transactions tax in order to make available dedicated, affordable, and accessible capital for green investments at scale. The roadmap to this new and urgently needed institutional infrastructure involves sustained engagement at various multilateral processes, and the instruments to actualize it by 2025 shall be a new global climate finance charter to be negotiated through the United Nations General Assembly, COP28, and associated processes. We understand the facts about our collective situation as a global community and as a member of the United Nations family. We know the magnitude of our shared challenges and common threats. We appreciate that multilateralism is on trial, and our task is to defend it. We also recognize that multilateralism is broken, and it is our responsibility to fix it. From this moment to 2030, and from our problems to their solutions, we are connected by a coherent agenda of robust collective action. We must therefore muster the courage and will to stand together in solidarity and act, to right past wrongs, solve present problems, and secure our collective future, to protect and empower all people and support our friends in need, to restore broken trust, raise hopes high, and keep faith strong, and finally, to pursue, achieve, and sustain positive change in order to make billions of cherished dreams come true. We must start right away, for we have no time to lose. And I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Kenya and Commander-in-Chief of the Defense Force.
We were listening to the President of Kenya, William Ruto. The head of state stressed the need for multilateralism and called for unity amongst African unions so as to fulfill its development aspirations. He also called for proactive commitment to peace between Moscow and Kiev and called for an effective mediation process. He also addressed the situation in Haiti and expressed the solidarity of Kenya with the Caribbean nation, calling it the ultimate test of international solidarity. He also recalled the global migration crisis, especially the one in Africa, and how it impacts local development. He also called for more initiatives focused on the youth and others aimed at green technologies so as to alleviate environmental stress. He also stressed the need to reform international financial institutions and to impose a carbon tax on trade and industries. We will have more details in upcoming news briefs. Stay with us.